So the question I've been getting a lot is, how much Bitcoin do I need? How much Bitcoin should you have? That's the question in the comment section I see pretty much every day on the numerous videos posted to the channel. And I think it's it's a very subjective way to approach it, I think. And it really depends on a lot of different things. I'm going to talk about the best thing that I've found in terms of like a guide or a template that you could follow to figure out how much Bitcoin you should be holding right now, kind of based on where you are in your life. That's one aspect of it. But the other thing too is the timeline. Like, are you in this thing because you want to pay off some debt in 4 years? Are you in this thing because you want to get an acreage in 20 years from now? Or is this something that you're going to be buying and holding on to forever for the next generation and the generation to come? It really depends. So obviously, the shorter your timeline, the more Bitcoin that you're going to need. But I'm going to show a little chart here that I created, and I'll explain kind of the thought process behind it. But I just think that this is a really good guide for people to follow when you're trying to figure out how much Bitcoin you should be trying to accumulate right now. And maybe before I show that, I think it's important to note that Bitcoin is going to be an ever-evolving thing here. It's not like you're going to get to a point in Bitcoin and you're going to say, okay, that's it. I got enough. I'm going to go back to saving, earning, and investing in the fiat system. Kind of once you get into Bitcoin, once you have a certain level of conviction, you don't really go backwards in that sense. So it's good to have a goal. A lot of people have like a quarter of a Bitcoin, 10 million sats, or 0.1 of a Bitcoin, or a full Bitcoin. But just understand that if you get there and when you get there, that's not the end of the road. That's kind of just like a progression that we're going along here. I think for the rest of your life, if you understand what's going on here within Bitcoin, you're forever going to be trading your time and energy for Bitcoin. And whether you're earning fiat or Bitcoin, you're always going to be storing it in a better battery, which is Bitcoin. So again, it's good to have goals. It's good to have kind of, a direction of what you want to get to, some milestones. But just understand that you're forever going to be trading your time and energy for Bitcoin because it's far superior to any other store of value out there. But in terms of like an idea of where should you start, start looking to get to, this is kind of what I came up with. So I got the age here, which is a big part of it. And the reason why I put an emphasis on the age is because of the timeline. Somebody who's 20 years old right now, and you have 1 million sats, and you sit on those 1 million sats for the next 50 years, those are going to be worth a substantial amount of purchasing power. Somebody who's 70 years old or above, you don't necessarily have, 60, 70 years left. I think that that's important to kind of acknowledge here. The fact that it might be something, Bitcoin historically has been fairly volatile. That's kind of what, the main buzzword, the main knock against Bitcoin is that it's very volatile. And so if you are somebody who's on a fixed income and you're in the retirement phase, you don't have a whole lot of money coming in, a whole lot of Bitcoin might not be your best play because it is going to go up. It's going to go down. And if you're kind of relying on that to live off of, it can be stressful. It can be scary. And so that's why I kind of broke these down by age, and I weighted this thing based on the age. And so that's kind of what I said here. If you're 20 years old, you should have a 100% allocation to Bitcoin. Assuming, again, we're going to bring the knowledge aspect into this as well, but that's where you want to be converting all your time and energy into Bitcoin, because the longer you hold on to this thing, the more it's going to be worth. So for somebody who's 20 years old, even 30 years old, I think that it is a 100% weight on that. Whereas somebody who's 70 years old, I said 0.4 as a weighting for that. So let's get into the knowledge part of this. And these are changing. So it's kind of based on all three of these, the allocation that you should consider having. So if we change this knowledge to be 10, our allocation would be 10. And the reason I say that knowledge is important here, I'll kind of go on a couple different tangents here, but it's very important to understand what you're holding here for a lot of reasons. But let's just start with the first one in terms of the security aspect of it. So if you had $100,000 of capital that you wanted to allocate to Bitcoin, and you knew nothing about Bitcoin, and you just went onto Coinbase, you went onto Bitcoin Well, ShakePay, whoever. You spent $100,000, you got the Bitcoin. Now what do you do with it? The majority of Bitcoin is actually not stolen or hacked or burnt down or whatever. It's by people losing it because they don't really know what they're doing yet. And so that's why I added the knowledge aspect to this, because the lower amount of knowledge that you have, the lower allocation to Bitcoin that you should have. Those two should kind of coincide. So that's why I think that if we're talking about a 20-year-old here, if you got 10, you should ask yourself this question: out of 100, what would you rate your knowledge? And that's kind of what this spot here is. So if you got somebody who's been here for a couple of years, they know the ins and outs, they know how to secure it, they know how to properly back up their hardware device, you know, you might say 60. So I think that that's a very reasonable allocation to your portfolio. And keep in mind here, when I'm talking about allocation, that means like your total investment portfolio as it stands today. And it's going to obviously go up over time if you're continuing to earn money. Your portfolio is going to get bigger, but based on where you are today, that's the allocation that should be in Bitcoin. So if your total investment portfolio right now is $100,000 between your savings accounts, your RSP, your HSA, your pension, anything, if your investment portfolio is 100K, you're 20 years old and you're about 60%, 60 out of 100 knowledgeable, you should have 60% of your investment portfolio in Bitcoin, allocated to Bitcoin. Let's go to somebody who's, let's say, 40 years old. This is probably the most common demographic within Bitcoin right now, which is the 31 to 50-year-olds. So I gave this a weight of 0.8. This could probably easily be 1 as well, I think, because there's still a lot of life left here, I think, for 31 to 50-year-olds, hopefully. Again, life's very unexpected. Expected. Just because we think that we're going to have 50 years ahead here, that means nothing. And that's why you should absolutely not, this is a good point to make, I think, here. You should not be sleeping on your inheritance stuff within Bitcoin. I think that there's way too many people out there with way too much Bitcoin who have zero idea what they're going to do after they're gone. Their family has no idea what they're going to do when they're gone. Their family might not even know how much they have. So that's a problem. The inheritance side is a problem. And that's why I kind of just wanted to point that out, the fact that life expectancy itself is kind of a scam. People put too much weight on how long they think they're going to be around versus the reality of, you know, it could change, it could end anytime. So with that in mind, though, we're going to go normal life expectancy here of 31 to 50, knowledge base of 50. I would say you should have a 40% allocation to Bitcoin. I would say that this demographic, though, is actually very well versed in terms of Bitcoin, self-custody and everything. So it might be 80. So in that sense, you should be looking at about a 64% allocation to your of your portfolio into Bitcoin. Let's go to 70 plus year olds here. So I'm going to keep the weighting there of 4% or 40%, sorry. Let's say that somebody has been, because you're retired, you got a lot of time to watch YouTube videos. So you're very familiar with how to store, you have a hardware device, maybe you have a multi-sig, maybe you're even running your own node. So you got an 80% knowledge base here, which would be pretty high, I think, for a 70-year-old. But even at that point, you can see here that that's only a 32% allocation to Bitcoin. I think the majority of this, and you should kind of be thinking about that 32% as like your legacy. The part of your portfolio that's going to be there in 10 years from now and in 100 years from now, and that's what your family's going to remember you for, is that 32% allocation to Bitcoin. The rest of that should be going into, you know, maybe something more, less volatile, I guess. And I hate using that term because Bitcoiners know that Bitcoin's not even volatile. It's just everything else is. But let's just go with, you know, how most people think here. So I would say the other part of the portfolio should be in something much more liquid and less volatile. So maybe cash, maybe like a high interest savings account, something that you can easily access if you needed to. So that's kind of the chart there that I wanted to show. I think that that's a really good guide for people to use. You can very easily recreate this yourself. just by 4 simple columns here and a couple different equations on this. It's basically the weight times the knowledge divided by 100. So you can do this yourself, and it doesn't have to be exact. Obviously, you're not going to try to, get exactly 32% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. But I think it's just a really good starting point for people to kind of understand that it's all based on your age, your knowledge, and then if you're somewhat in the ballpark there, I think that makes a lot of sense. The one caveat I would say to this is that if you are somebody who's like, let's say 30, 40 years old, let's go 60 years old. You got a lot of capital that you've earned from, going to a job for the last 30 years. You got a really solid pension, good retirement, and you have a very small understanding of Bitcoin, but you get it. You see where this is going. You're very excited, and you just want to dump as much of your portfolio in as possible, which goes against this because the knowledge is applicable within this. But let's say you're like, whatever, Joe, I don't care. I'm just going to go all in on this thing. The one thing I would say is that's totally okay. Just make sure that you aren't the one that's responsible for holding it. Because one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is that you can actually take self-custody of this thing. Not many other assets you can truly own. And I would argue that Bitcoin is the only thing that you can really own because you can store it in your head if you do it properly. So I wouldn't say no. I would just say be very careful. And you got a couple options with that. Number one, you could use a service like an over-the-counter exchange like Caleb and Brown, where they accept a very high dollar amount buy, and they actually store it for you too. So you can buy it with them. You can talk to somebody on the phone. You pay a little bit higher of a fee, kind of. It actually works out to be about the same because they're an over-the-counter. But you could give them, send them a bank wire. They buy the Bitcoin. You talk to them on the phone. And you can leave it there as long as you want to. They use a third-party custodian called Fireblocks. So it's very, very reputable, very safe. They've been around for over 10 years now, I think. And regardless of what country you're in, you can use a service like Caleb and Brown. So that's what I would say. And you can just kind of hold it there indefinitely. And you can even kind of, the way I would approach something like that is that let's say you're brand new to Bitcoin. You want a lot of Bitcoin. You call Caleb and Brown, you get some Bitcoin. And then as your knowledge grows, you can call them and say, hey, send me 5% of it. My knowledge is now 5 out of 100. Send me 5% of my Bitcoin. Learn how to do that, get the foundation very strong. And then you keep learning about Bitcoin. Maybe your knowledge grows to 20%. And you say, okay, I want, another 15% of my Bitcoin. I want you to send it to me. And then as you get to about the 50, that's where you're like, okay, well, I get a good understanding of this. I'm going to take it all from Caleb and Brown. I'm going to take self-custody of this. And I think that that's a very good idea. And kind of on a smaller scale, the thing I would say is if you don't have, hundreds of thousands of dollars that you want to sink into it, but it's still a significant amount for you. The one thing I would say is you could actually use an exchange like ShakePay here in Canada, who I don't necessarily love. But the nice thing about them is you can actually leave the Bitcoin with them to hold. So there are certain ways to buy Bitcoin like Bitcoin Well, Bull Bitcoin, where you basically buy it and they send it to you. They don't hold it for you. So you could, if you want to get a little bit far ahead of your skis here, you could just leave it on the exchange for a little while. But the one thing I would say is make sure you take action. Try to learn as much as you can, as fast as you can, and get it off the exchange as soon as possible. So that's one thing I would say on that there are options for somebody else holding your Bitcoin. If you want to, again, go a little bit further than you think you're ready for, somebody else can hold it for you. And keep in mind that there's going to be a lot of people on YouTube and other places that tell you that, not your keys, not your coins, get your Bitcoin off the exchanges. It's okay. If you want to leave it there for a little while, if you want to buy, if you want to, make a significant allocation and you're not quite there yet, it's okay. I'd say that like 95% of the people that actually lose their Bitcoin aren't at an exchange. That's not where it happens. It's that they try to do too much too fast. They don't know what they're doing. They either overcomplicate or they're just completely out to lunch and they actually lose access to their Bitcoin. I'd say that's 95% of the situations there. So don't get don't get talked out of that. I think that that's, again, a very common theme within the Bitcoiner space, and it's fair. It really is. But there are certain exceptions to everything. So that would be one. And the other thing too, I would say, is if you are somebody who wants to allocate fast before you're ready for it, just hire somebody. It's very similar to like learning to drive a car, where you turn 16 years old, you don't just get a car, start it, and hit the highway. You maybe do a couple laps around the block, maybe around your farm or whatever. And then when you actually go to start driving, you have somebody right beside you, like a driver instructor. And they have a brake there that they can press anytime if you're going too fast. They can give you some tips along the way. So there are many great Bitcoin advisors out there who are more than happy to help you with that. So that's what I would say. And you can both those are kind of shortcuts, but it still requires some investment, either your time or some money or trust in somebody else to hold it for a little while. So that's that's what I would say in terms of how much Bitcoin you need. I think that the last thing I would say here is that you should act with some sort of urgency, because we've seen in the last couple months and a year, the biggest firms in the world like BlackRock, Larry Fink, the US government, Donald Trump, MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor now has almost 500,000 Bitcoin. These people are trying to get as much as they can before this becomes mainstream. That's what they're doing behind the scenes. And I think the average person still has a golden opportunity here to get as much Bitcoin as they possibly can before all of these people are buying Bitcoin. That's going to be your last chance to make a significant amount of a dent in Bitcoin and really change the direction of your family's future. So act with a little bit of urgency. And that's why I kind of recommended something like Caleb and Brown, or hiring somebody to help you with it, because there is some urgency here, and you should you should be acting on it, because I'll leave it there. I think that today is the least risky, biggest reward ever to be in Bitcoin right now. Because even if you compared it to 10 years ago, yes, you could have got a lot more Bitcoin, but there was far less certainty. Larry Fink wasn't here. Donald Trump, countries weren't buying it. There was a whole lot of uncertainty there. I think that today there's been no better time to buy Bitcoin than today. And it's a very small window that we're working with here. So I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know in the comments of, if I said something wrong, or if you would be doing something differently. I'm interested, because this is something that's always kind of evolving and always on my mind. So I'm very interested to hear, what I got wrong or what I got right here. So anyways, have yourselves a great day. I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.